Yeah. Okay, so let's start again. Let's take a few moments to settle our minds down and then generate a refresh of positive motivation for being here. So let go of or put aside all other thoughts of the past or the future, other places, your plans, your projects, problems. So put them aside for now. Just let your mind be in the present moment. And then remember what we thought about at the beginning of this session today, generating either the bodhicitta motivation, the aspiration to become a fully enlightened Buddha for the benefit of all living beings, or if you're not at that point yet where you're ready to have such a motivation, at least have some kind of positive, constructive, altruistic motivation, wanting to make your life meaningful and beneficial for as many people and beings as possible, and wanting to learn things here that will bring that about. So this morning we were looking at the 4 tasks of living and dying, one of which is about making connection, healing relationships. So see if you can recognize any areas in your life where you need to work on that, maybe particular relationships, particular people in your life that things are not in perfect shape. There may be some anger, resentment, jealousy, some other negative feelings in relation to that person, not such good communication. So if you do think of any situation like that, see if you can generate the wish to heal that situation, and think of some things you can start to do towards that, even if you're not ready at this point to fully heal that relationship, resolve those problems, but just starting to take steps in that direction. So you may need more time to explore this question and come up with practical ways to heal that relationship. So just make that resolution to return to this issue and explore ways of healing that relationship. And if you have a number of these issues, maybe not just one, but maybe several, you could also prioritize, like some may be more important, like family members or spiritual teachers, or people who've been really important and helpful to you in your life. So perhaps those take greater priority compared with neighbors or distant relatives. So this is an important issue. Hopefully we will have time before our life ends that we can work on these relationships, heal them, resolve any problems. And even if the other person isn't willing to engage in communication with us, but at least in our own mind, we can heal whatever painful or negative feelings there may be and come to a state of feeling at peace and clear about doing as much as we are able to do from our side. To make the resolution to keep working on this. Okay, so now we'll start looking at the practical things we can do to prepare for death. So I have some slides with these. So one is to live ethically. And in Buddhism, but this is only for, I'll just talk louder. I get a little spaced out sometimes. Okay, sorry. We're now looking at ways that we can prepare for death. So this isn't the right slide. Could you go back? I think it's number 14. One more. Yeah, there we go. Okay, the one with the bird. Living ethically. The next one down. Anyway. Yeah, so living ethically. According to Buddhism, ethics is basically about non-harming, living in a way that we don't harm others as much as possible, at least intentionally. Sometimes we unintentionally do harmful things or say harmful things, but at least we have to have the intention to not harm and really try to not harm other living beings. And in Buddhism, that isn't just human beings, but all living beings, even animals, insects, and so on. And so how this is helpful at the time of death is because if we do harmful things to others, if we cause suffering to others, we also cause suffering to ourselves. We're harming ourselves, we're damaging ourselves, even though we may not always be aware of it, or we may pretend that's not the case. And we might go through life like trying to forget the harmful things that we did, but they can come up at the time of death. And I'll tell you an example of this. There's a doctor in Holland named Pim van Lommel, and he was a cardiologist. Well, he's still a cardiologist, although he kind kind of gave up practicing cardiology because he heard from some of his patients about near-death experiences they had when they were after having a cardiac arrest and their heart stopped, their brain stopped, everything stopped. They were like dead, and then they were revived. And during that time when they were dead, they had experiences, not everyone, of course, but some. And he got so interested in this phenomenon that he decided to do research. And he spent like 15 years doing research, scientific studies of this phenomena, and then published his findings in a book. And I haven't read his book. Apparently it's a little hard, kind of more technical or scientific, but I did read an interview with him, and he mentioned that that sometimes, well, you've probably heard this as well, that before dying, people sometimes have a total recall of everything that happened in their life. Have you heard of that? Like just within a very short time, they remember everything they've ever done. And this includes the harmful things that they did. And they can experience not just what they did to the other person, but the other person's feelings, how the other person felt through that harmful action. So he said, for example, somebody remembered as a 4-year-old hurting another child, and they felt that child's pain. They could feel what that child felt. And so he says, every thought we have, and I think goes also for every action that we do, leaves an imprint on our mind. This is karma. This is what we see in karma. And so he's kind of, confirming karma. And then that all those things can come up at the time of death. It's like we face everything we've ever done. So if we've done a lot of harmful things and we didn't do anything to rectify that, then the memory of those things can come up at the time of death. And then, it's hard to have a peaceful state of mind if you're remembering all the bad things you've done, all the suffering you caused to others. So the less we do harmful things to others, then the fewer painful memories we'll have at the time of death. And instead, if we've been kind and helpful and done our best to help others, then that will enable us to have a peaceful mind. We'll feel good about the way we lived our life. And so that's basically what ethics is all about in Buddhism. Having compassion, understanding that nobody wants to suffer, nobody wants pain, nobody wants to be killed, just like us. Everyone else is just like us. We don't want to be hurt, so others don't want to be hurt either. So keeping that in mind, it's like the golden rule. This kind of idea is found in all religions. Don't do to others what you don't want them to do to you, and do to others what you would like them to do to you. So just keeping that in mind and trying to live that way as much as we can, that's basically the meaning of ethics. And so it's not just for our mind at the time of death to be more peaceful and have less to worry about and regret, but for future lives, because harming others creates negative karma, which we will meet the results of in our future lives. Painful, unpleasant results. And so it's basically about learning about karma, what kind of actions are positive, virtuous, the cause of happiness, and what kind of actions are harmful, non-virtuous, the cause of suffering. And then just trying to live as much as we can in avoidance of the negative ones and doing the positive ones. And then there's also the practice of purification. So some people may think that karma is like fate. You do some negative karma and you are destined to experience suffering as a result of that. And there's nothing you can do about it. It's not like that. We can purify even the most horrendous actions. Like there was this person at the time of the Buddha named Angulimala, which means rosary of thumbs. because he was actually the disciple of some other teacher, and because of various causes and conditions, that teacher said or asked Angulimala to kill 1,000 people. And he said, if you can kill 1,000 people, you can attain nirvana, something like that, something really weird, bizarre out of, And so Angulimala started going out and killing people. And he's like a mass murderer. So he'd kill people and then cut off their thumbs. And then he made a rosary of thumbs that he wore around his neck. Yeah. And so he managed to kill 990 people, 999. He just had one more to go. And he had trouble finding anybody because everybody had run away. He was like a terrorist. So he thought, okay, I'll go and kill my mother. She was around. So he was heading in that direction. And the Buddha realized what was going on. So the Buddha came to where Angulimala was. Anyway, it's kind of a funny story, but so Angulimala saw the Buddha walking along the road and thought, okay, there's one I can kill. So he started running after him. And however fast he ran, he couldn't catch up to the Buddha, even though the Buddha was walking kind of very slowly. But Angulimala couldn't catch him. So he finally shouted out, stop, and came up to where the Buddha was. And the Buddha said, I have stopped. When are you going to stop? Something like that. And Angulimala got it, like Buddha meant, I have stopped killing. When are you going to stop killing? So Angulimala realized, what he had been doing was totally wrong. And he bowed down to the Buddha and asked for help and guidance. So he became a disciple of the Buddha. And in that very lifetime, he became an arhat, meaning his mind became liberated from all negative attitudes and delusions and ignorance and so on. And he attained nirvana. And so even in that very lifetime where he killed so many people, he was able to purify that and reach nirvana. So I'm sure none of us have done anything like that. Yeah. So there's no need to worry. Whatever negative karma you've created, it can be purified. And the same with Milarepa. You've probably heard of Milarepa. He started off as a black magician and practiced black magic. And he also caused the death of quite a few people and animals. And then he repented and became a practitioner, and in that same lifetime reached enlightenment. So it just shows that it is possible. If we really want to purify our mind, purify our karma, we can do it. So we shouldn't think that anything we've done was so bad that it can't be purified and we're hopeless and feel despair and so on. So that's part of ethical living as well, is doing purification, clearing up our karma, and then really trying hard to live a good life. Any questions about that? Because I don't know how much all of you've learned before. Karma is a huge subject, very complex. We don't really have time to go into all the details here, but I do recommend making a study of karma and also the practice of purification. Okay, then next is meditation, practicing meditation. So there's many different kinds of meditations in Buddhism, and also there's different traditions of Buddhism. So there's Tibetan Buddhism, what we're doing here, there's Zen, there's Theravada, Chinese Buddhism, many different ways of practicing Buddhism. And when people ask me, how do I know which one to choose? I say, you just follow your heart, because each of us is different and we have different inclinations, different karma from the past. So it's good to explore a little bit, read some books, listen to different teachings from different teachers, and hopefully you will find connection. You'll feel connected with one or more than one teacher and tradition. basically, the purpose of meditation in Buddhism, the word meditation itself means, the word in Tibetan, which is gom, it means to familiarize, to become familiar. So what we're doing in meditation is making our minds familiar with positive, constructive, beneficial states of mind. Making a habit of being in a certain state of mind, like a calm, concentrated state of mind, watching the breath, not letting the mind wander away. Or in our tradition, we do a lot of reflective, analytical meditation, and that's to develop positive qualities like compassion. So there's meditations to increase our compassion, to increase our loving kindness, to increase our wisdom. But yeah, basically the point is to make our minds more familiar with positive, beneficial states of mind. And the more we do it, then the more that becomes our default mode, until it's almost like effortless. You don't have to try anymore. You don't have to think anymore. You're just naturally like that. So meditation helps us be in a positive state of mind, and then that will help at the time of death, because at that time we want to be able to be in a positive state of mind, not in a negative state of mind, anger, fear, attachment, or whatever, something that would hinder a positive experience of dying and going into the next life. So, yeah, I'm just giving the general idea, but if you feel connected with that, then it's good to. There's lots of courses, books, even apps. I haven't tried the apps, but there's apps that people use to help them meditate, practice meditation. And then the next one, next type of practice is cultivating loving kindness and compassion. So I've already spoken about how important that is, how beneficial it is if we can have compassion. Like Lama Zopa Rinpoche said, that's the best thing to have in our mind as we are dying. And the photo in this slide is a picture of Maury Schwartz. There's a book called Tuesdays with Maury. Have you read that? It was a bestseller some years ago, and they also made a film of it. And it's a real story, not a fiction. And so Maury was a professor of sociology, I believe, somewhere on the East Coast. And he got, is it ALS? ALS? Huh? Lou Gehrig's disease. Yeah. And it started from the feet. So, he lost energy. I don't know, what do you call it? He wasn't able to use his feet. Then it kind of gradually moves up the body, becoming paralyzed. And it's terminal, so there was no cure for it. And I can't remember how long the period was that he was ill with this before he finally passed away. But he had a really positive attitude about dying. And one of his former students, I think his name was Mitch Abram, he's in the photo there, who was a writer. He was actually a sports, what do you call it? Like, covering sports, journalist. Anyway, huh? Yeah, he would cover football games and that kind of thing. So when he heard that his former professor was dying, he went to visit him, and they decided to collaborate on a book. Mitch would visit every week on Tuesdays, and they would talk about different things, and then that would be recorded and made into a book. And so mostly it's just Maury's sharing of his insights and his wisdom and his positive, his positive attitudes. And you can see in the photo, he's just so joyful. He's the one who's dying. But he was just so full of love and kindness and caring about others and joy. He was just spreading joy to everybody around him. So I thought that's a really good illustration of this point of, I mean, I think quite difficult to be joyful and caring about others when you pass away, but he'd been living that way. His whole life had been like that. He'd been very caring about his students and his family and so on. So again, the way we live, the way we are during our life will affect the way we are at the time of death. So if we would like to be that way, loving and caring and joyful at the time of death, we need to work on those attitudes now as much as we can. Yeah, so in Buddhism, there's lots of methods for cultivating loving kindness. Loving kindness is the wish for others to be happy, caring about others, wanting them to be happy, wanting to do what we can to bring them happiness. Compassion is very similar. They're kind of like two sides of a coin or two sides of a hand. But compassion is explained as the wish for others to not suffer. So it's more when we recognize that someone is unhappy or in pain or in need and suffering, and we're moved by that, we're affected by that such that we want to help them. We want to reach out and do what we can to relieve their suffering. So both of those qualities are essential on the path, especially the Bodhisattva's path to enlightenment. Those are really the qualities that motivate someone to want to follow the Bodhisattva's path and reach Buddhahood, because that's the best way to help others. As we are now, as ordinary beings, even if we want to help others, we are limited. Physically, mentally, emotionally, we're limited in what we can do to help others. But if we learn about qualities of a Buddha, then we realize, well, there's no limitation. A Buddha is able to have this incredible knowledge and understanding of other beings and how to help them, and various powers and abilities to appear in different forms that can help them. So it starts with love and compassion, wanting to help others, and then realizing that is the best way to do so. So, and as I mentioned before, being more focused on others, having more altruism, love, and compassion for others, that itself will relieve our own suffering. Because if we don't have altruism, and if we have this tendency to just think about me, I'm the center of the universe, I'm the most important person of all, whatever's happening with me takes precedence over everything else. So that's the way most of us are. I'm still like that myself. And so if that's your orientation, then whatever problem you have, whatever unhappiness you have, whatever difficulty you have, you just get totally obsessed with that and focused on that. And then that, that kind of attitude would just make you suffer more. You suffer more because of being concerned about yourself. Whereas if you have this concern about others, then you're not paying so much attention to your own suffering and not feeling so much suffering. We were just talking yesterday about some years ago, Lama Zopa Rinpoche had a stroke. And it happened right in the middle of a teaching. He was teaching in Australia, and the stroke happened, and he was taken to the hospital. And one side of, I think his left side, was paralyzed. And there's this little video of him sitting in the hospital, sitting on the hospital bed, and just laughing and laughing, laughing. And it's hard to understand what he's saying because, left side of his mouth was also paralyzed. But it's like he was trying to pick up his left. He couldn't lift his left hand, but he would use his right hand to lift up his left hand. So he's doing like this and just laughing like it was the funniest thing in the world. And one nun that I know who was in the medical profession, she said, normally when people have a stroke, they are devastated. They are, depressed and unhappy and, oh, what's happening to me? And, oh, will I ever be able to do this again? And so on. So he had just, opposite reaction. He thought it was really funny. And he was also, apparently, he was sitting in the hospital and just praying for all the other patients in the hospital. So he wasn't thinking at all about himself and, what was happening with him. So that's just an example of someone who's so trained in compassion and love and altruism. And so even when, they face some kind of problem or difficulty, there's very, very little concern about themselves and more concern about others. So the more we train our mind and get familiar with those kind of attitudes, then we'll be able to be like Maury Schwartz or like Lama Zopa Rinpoche. So even in the face of death, not being depressed or unhappy, but even joyful and loving and caring about others. Also, this kind of attitude of love, compassion, altruism is a great way to purify our negativities. So just making any effort to meditate on and cultivate and practice those kind of qualities, that itself will purify negative karma, negative energy, negative attitudes like anger and so on. So for numerous reasons, then that kind of practice will help us in the face of death. Okay, next is devotional practices. So not everyone feels comfortable with that kind of practice. There's a lot of this in Tibetan Buddhism. Basically, it involves feeling faith in the Buddha, taking refuge in the Buddha, and we have many Buddhas, not just Shakyamuni Buddha, but we have Medicine Buddha, Tara, Chenrezig, many, many different figures of enlightened beings. And again, different people feel maybe more attracted to one or another. So you can choose whichever Buddha figures you're most comfortable with, attracted to, and practice. Do practices related to that particular Buddha. And like Lama Zopa Rinpoche said, Medicine Buddha is particularly good for death, dying, as well as sickness. I think it was in Sangye Rinpoche's book, he mentioned a story of this woman in New York who, I think she had cancer, something terminal. And she tried all the medical methods to cure her cancer, but none of them worked. So she continued, being very ill and was approaching death. And she went to see one Lama, I think it was Dudjom Rinpoche, he was a great Nyingma Lama, and asked him for a practice that she could do to prepare herself for dying. So he recommended Medicine Buddha. So she started doing the Medicine Buddha practice. And instead of dying, she survived. So her, this illness that wasn't cured by Western medical methods was cured by doing Medicine Buddha practice. Now, that doesn't always work, so don't expect it. I think it also depends on karma. But anyway, it just shows that practices like that can be very powerful. And even if they don't cure your illness, they're very helpful for your mind to be more positive and also to feel this connection. Instead of feeling alone, abandoned, nobody there to help me, you feel this connection with that Buddha. And it's very soothing to then think of the Buddha and feel the Buddha's presence. So if you can do that at the time of death, you can think of at least one Buddha and feel that Buddha is there with you, then that will help you be in a good state of mind. And when I lived in Singapore for 11 years during the 90s, and I was the people I was working with there were mainly Chinese Buddhists, and they're very devotional people, wonderful. And so one time I was asked to go to visit a woman who was in the hospital. I never met her before, but she was a friend of somebody, and they said that she had been diagnosed with something and needed to have surgery immediately. So it happened. It was very sudden for her. She found herself in the hospital about to have surgery and was like apparently very frightened. And they thought meeting me would be helpful for her. So I went to the hospital and knocked on the door, and she said, "Yeah, come in." So I went in, and I saw this woman who looked totally radiant and happy and not at all what I expected. She was going to be terrified. And she said that the night before she had a dream, and in her dream she saw Kuan Yin. Kuan Yin is the Chinese form of Avalokiteshvara, Chenrezig. But Tibetans must be Chenrezig here somewhere. Oh, somewhere up there. Yeah. Anyway, and a statue outside in the back, that's Kuan Yin. So anyway, she had a dream of Kuan Yin, and that made her feel she's okay. You know, Kuan Yin is there looking after her, protecting her, and everything's going to be okay. So just that one dream knocked out her fear, and just shows how if you do have devotion and you have this connection with the Buddha, any Buddha figure, and pray and think of that Buddha figure, then that can really help you. So devotional practices include taking refuge and reciting prayers, reciting mantras. So again, learning a mantra and reciting a mantra is very helpful to keep the mind calm, not frightened, not proliferating, what's going to happen to me? Is this going to happen? Is that going to happen? Have you ever noticed that? How the mind can just create all these worst case scenarios and they may never happen, but just having those in the mind, it's hard to be comfortable, hard to feel peaceful and happy. So, yeah. So just turn on Siri. I don't want Siri. How do I go away? How do you get rid of that? I must have pressed a button or something.
Oh my goodness. Can we just get rid of her?
She's talking to me.
I'm not sure I understand. Oh. I think we have to go to your settings. Siri, go away.
Oh.
We have to go to our settings and then we can
shut it down.
Yeah.
Okay.
And slide that.
I never even use it. I don't know what happened. Okay. Yeah. So like I say, this kind of practice doesn't work for everybody. Some people just don't feel comfortable with, Buddha's, deities, prayers, and so on. So if that's not your thing, hopefully one of the other practices will work for you. Okay, the next one is to study spiritual teachings. So, again, this would be according to your inclination. Everyone has different needs, dispositions, so people are attracted to different spiritual traditions. So you can take your pick, but the teachings of the spiritual traditions, like those of the Buddha or Jesus or other great saints, they contain a lot of wisdom. They help us to be less attached to this world and our body and life and people and so on, and help us to have more compassion and more love, help us know how to deal with problems and difficulties in life. So reading these teachings, making ourselves familiar with them, is helpful because it's like planting seeds in our mind. You read some wise words of the Buddha or another great sage or saint, And then that's like a seed in your mind. And then when you find yourself in a difficult situation, even without deliberately trying to remember, it could just pop up. You might just hear the voice of the Buddha or the voice of Jesus or whatever talking to you and telling you, this is what you need to do. And so that, making ourselves familiar with spiritual teachings. So, I mean, a lot of people will have a book on their bedside table and read a little bit before going to bed, or read a little bit in the morning when they wake up. So I think, even if you have a very busy life and a lot of responsibilities, finding even just 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 15 minutes a day to read something spiritual, it's more healthy and nourishing for your mind than reading murder mysteries, or I don't know, westerns, or romantic things that people normally read, or the news, which is often quite distressing. So do try to make time for that in your day. And also now with the internet, there's so many, it's almost overwhelming. Like you have to pick and choose who to listen to. So many teachings, podcasts, available online. So there's a huge amount of information out there that can be very helpful for us to be more prepared for death when it happens, to make our minds more acquainted with spiritual ways of thinking, ways of dealing with problems, and so on. Okay, so those are some suggestions, general suggestions of things we can do. Hopefully at least one of these is something you feel comfortable with, something you can do. Maybe more than one, the more the better. And then I'd like to share a traditional teaching from the Tibetan tradition called the 7-point mind training. This is the 5 powers. Some of you may have heard this before. So mind training or thought training, lojong in Tibetan, is a whole kind of genre of teachings, texts, practices that are for the purpose of changing our mind so that we have less negative, disturbing thoughts, more positive ones. And also there's a lot of methods for when we do face problems and difficulties in life, how we can turn those around, use them, like recycling garbage, recycling things, using things that we would normally not want and want to get rid of, but they can actually be useful for us in our spiritual growth, our spiritual practice, and just being a happier person, being a better person. So that's what lojong or thought training is all about. And there's what's probably the original text on lojong. It's called a 7-point mind training. It's been translated numerous times. There's many English translations of it. The writer, the author is Geshe Chikawa. And so within this text, 7-point mind training, there's a lot of other material, but there's this list of what are called 5 powers. And these are things you practice during your life, but then there's also a way of practicing them at the time of death. And it's said that if you can practice these at the time of death, it's very beneficial. And in fact, it's the best poa. I don't know if you've heard of this practice called poa. Poa means transferring or transferal. It's a practice. It's actually in the tantric tradition, but people train in this practice during their life. And the idea is sending your consciousness out of your body, out of the top of your head, to a pure land, The most common, I think, form of this is the Pure Land of Amitabha Buddha, which is called Sukhavati. So Amitabha Buddha is one more of the Buddha figures, and he has a realm, a Pure Land called Sukhavati, or the Land of Bliss. And especially in Chinese Buddhism, this is a very, very popular, well-known practice. Also Japanese Buddhism. So a lot of people focus on this practice during their life of connecting with Amitabha Buddha, praying to Amitabha Buddha, and having the wish to go to his Pure Land after death. And in the Tibetan tradition, there's this practice called Poa, where you train in a certain meditative practice to take your consciousness out of your body, from your heart chakra, and then out through the top of your head and going to Amitabha's Pure Land. So that's what's called Poa. And it's something you can do yourself, but also it's common when someone dies to ask a Lama to come and do Poa for the person who's died, to sort of shoot their consciousness to Amitabha's Pure Land. But anyway, so it's, yeah, a lot of people doing that kind of practice. But this is said to be better. This practice is better than Poa, because this way you're really guaranteed to go to a fortunate situation in your next life. So, and Lama Zopa Rinpoche really recommends this practice of the 5 powers. First is called the power of the white seed. So I think white seed refers to good karma, practicing things that are virtuous and positive, and in that way planting seeds in our mind that will grow into positive experiences in the future. So it's recommended that before we pass away, it's good to give up attachment to our things, give them away to others, make offerings to our teachers, to monastics, to Buddhist centers, Buddhist temples, and so on. And so in that way, we're relinquishing our attachment, which could be a kind of hang up at the time of death, but we're also creating merit, the practice of giving, whether it's to ordinary people who are hungry or impoverished, or to spiritual beings, monasteries, and so on. So this is a practice of virtue, a way to create virtue. So that's something good to do before dying. Also meditating on refuge. If you're a Buddhist and you've taken refuge in the 3 jewels, Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha, then renew that attitude of refuge in the 3 jewels and really feel confident that they are there to help you and guide you. Generate other positive thoughts like compassion, love, bodhicitta, and so on. So basically just reconfirming, renewing, refreshing whatever positive states of mind you've been working on during your life. Make sure those are really strong in your mind before passing away. That way you have lots of good seeds of good karma in your mind for the future. The second is the power of intention. So this means generating really strong and positive intentions, resolutions for how you want to be at the time of death. Like, I will not let my mind get carried away by anger, fear, attachment, any of the negative states of mind. And instead, I will keep my mind in a positive state as much as I possibly can. And also approaching death in a positive state of mind, thinking I would like to use this experience in a way that's beneficial, cause of enlightenment, beneficial to others. Like Rinpoche says, die with compassion, die with bodhicitta. So instead of thinking of death as being a horrible situation and dreading it, but thinking, oh, it will be an opportunity for me to strengthen my compassion and love and bodhicitta and learn things, grow spiritually. So have that kind of resolution. And I think also have the intention, like I mentioned before, of where you want to go next, what you would like to achieve next. Being born in a situation where you can again meet spiritual teachers, spiritual teachings, continue following the path. So having very strong intention and making prayers for that. And then 3 is the power of countering negativity. So that means in case negative states of mind come up, anger or attachment or fear or jealousy, whatever, being determined to work on those, not let your mind be overtaken by them, but instead apply antidotes to them, to reduce them, to overcome them. And purification also is included here. So it's said to be very good to do purification practice just before dying. Think of whatever negative karma you've created in the past and feel strong regret for that, and then do whatever purification practice you're most comfortable with. And then 4th, power of prayer. So it says make strong prayers to never be separated from bodhicitta, to always have the opportunity to learn about and develop and practice bodhicitta and follow the bodhisattva's path, including whatever other, like emptiness is also a part of that path. So making a strong prayer to meet teachers who can explain emptiness and help us understand emptiness and everything else we need to progress on the path to enlightenment. So making strong prayers for the future and then dedicating whatever merit, whatever virtue we've created in our life to those goals. And power of familiarity. So what this means is whatever we are most familiar with or habituated to is what will arise most easily and naturally in our mind. So understanding that should give us strong incentive to make our minds familiar with things that are positive, like love and compassion and bodhicitta. Because the more we meditate on those, think about those, practice those, wish to have those attitudes in our mind, then the more easily and naturally they will arise in our mind. On the other hand, if we are familiar with anger, selfishness, and so on, the negative states of mind, then those are the ones that will arise most easily and naturally. So making ourselves familiar with positive states of mind and ways of being. So this is just a very brief explanation. I think in the book Wholesome Fear, which I mentioned, book by Lama Zopa Rinpoche, there's more explanation of these if you're interested. And it's also said in these teachings that when it is time to die, it's good to lie on our right side. Have you heard this before? They actually say it's good to do that when we're going to sleep at night. This is the Buddha, when he passed away, he adopted this posture, lying on your right side, and you have your right hand on your cheek and blocking your nostril with the right ring finger. They call that the lion posture. It's what the Buddha You may have seen statues. In Asia, they have statues of the Buddha lying in that posture. So that's the posture he was in when he passed away, attained parinirvana. And so it's recommended that we lie that way when we go to sleep at night, and also when we're dying, to lie in that position. Blocking the right nostril has to do with stopping attachment. The energy of attachment, I think, runs in that side of the body. So this is to help us to overcome attachment. And if we're familiar with the practice of Tonglen, taking and giving, then that's a good thing to do when we die. And I was thinking maybe it would be good to do that practice. Some of you may not have done it before, so I thought we could do a little practice of Tonglen. And there's different ways of doing it. So the term Tonglen is Tibetan, and it means taking and giving. Or it actually means giving and taking, but it's better to do taking first and then giving. So the idea is taking is, you think of the suffering of others and generate very strong compassion, wishing them to be free of that suffering. And then you wish to remove their suffering, to take their suffering from them and take it onto yourself. And when you take it onto yourself, normally it's explained that you imagine your self-centered attitude, the selfish attitude, which is the opposite to bodhicitta and altruism. You imagine that in your heart in the form of like a lump, like a dark blob there in the heart chakra, and you think that's the self-centered attitude. It's an obstacle for our happiness, and it's an obstacle for our spiritual growth. So it's something we want to overcome. We want to get rid of. So you imagine that in your heart, and then you think of the suffering of one other person or a number of other beings, and you imagine that suffering coming in the form of smoke or fog or something. And you can do this with the breathing, but it doesn't have to be. You can also just imagine it coming in. And when it comes into you, it turns into something like a bolt of lightning, something very powerful, and it crashes into this blob of the self-centeredness and makes it non-existent, annihilates it. So it's like you're taking the suffering of others and using it to overcome your self-centered attitude. So that's the taking part, and it's related with compassion, feeling compassion for others. And then after taking away the suffering of others, then you wish them to have happiness. So that's the giving part, and this is done with love. Love is wishing others to have happiness. So you think, everybody wants happiness, but they don't always have what they want, what they need in order to be happy. So I want to give them happiness. So you think of all your good karma, your merit, your health, resources, all the good things you have in your life, and you imagine that in the form of light and send that out to the other person or the other beings, and it turns into whatever they need to be happy. So you're giving to others what will bring them happiness. And you can imagine them receiving those things, enjoying them, being happy. So it's a really beautiful practice. And in the Tibetan tradition, it's not really a beginner's practice normally, although I have met people who can relate to it right from the beginning and are happy to do it. But in terms of the progression of practices we do, this is actually something that comes later. It's not normally taught to beginners. So ideally you have already learned about and practiced more basic teachings, like about the Four Noble Truths and the path to enlightenment, and you've been working on love and compassion and the wish to benefit others. So having become familiar with those ideas and those practices, then it's kind of easy and natural to flow into doing Tonglen. But some people will feel frightened, you know. Just recently, I heard from somebody who tried to do this practice and said, "No way, I've had too much suffering in my life. I don't want any more." So, so you do have to be in the right state of mind and not feel pressured, like I have to do this, and feeling frightened and resistant and so on. And in the Tibetan tradition, the way it's explained is very elaborate. You think of all living beings, not just human beings, but all the other living beings in the universe, and feel this strong compassion for them and think about their suffering and then take all their suffering on. And so it's quite, and they do say that, some people may not feel ready to do that from the beginning. And so if that's the case, start with your own suffering. Say, that's a good place to start. You think of your own problems, your own suffering, such as what you will probably experience in the future. You know, as we get older, especially with our body will age and we'll have more difficulties, physical difficulties and illness, more susceptible to illness and injuries and so on. And then death, separation from loved ones. So you just imagine the problems that you're likely to experience in the future and feel compassion for this future self who will be going through those problems, and then feel the wish to remove those problems, take those problems away, take them onto yourself and use it to overcome the self-centered attitude, and then give to your future self whatever will be beneficial for them to have happiness. So that's a good place to start if you're not ready to take on the suffering of others. So I was thinking to do this meditation, but maybe good to have a short break first. Let's have a 5-minute break, refresh yourself, and then come back and do the meditation. So I thought, since some of you may be newish to this tradition and not familiar with this practice, I thought to do an easy way. So there's also a way of doing Tonglen with a problem you're experiencing right now. And it's very effective. Of course, when we have a problem, and if there's a solution to the problem, we can, apply the solution. But sometimes it's not always possible to immediately clear away the problem. It might be there for a while before it goes away. And so this practice is a very effective way of changing our attitude about the problem, being more accepting of it, not so upset about it. And sometimes it kind of works like magic. The problem will go away by doing this practice. So it's like a first baby step in the practice of Tonglen, and something we can do with a problem that's presently happening in our life. So let's try that. So sit comfortably. Try to keep your back straight. And it's probably a good idea to not close your eyes, but leave them open a little. Otherwise, we might fall asleep. Leave your eyes open so there's light coming in, and that can help you to stay awake. And begin by contemplating the self-centered or selfish attitude that we all have. It's normal for ordinary beings to be concern more about ourselves than about others. But this doesn't serve us well. It can bring a lot of problems in our life. It can bring problems in our relationships if we care more about ourselves than about the other. And also, if we're overly concerned with ourselves, our mind isn't very happy. As opposed to being more altruistic, thinking of others, caring about others, wanting to help others, and so on. So that brings a lot of benefit in our relationships and also just within our mind. We feel more happy, more satisfied. It's more fulfilling than being selfish. So just think about that and see if you can recognize that self-centeredness is not helpful and is even harmful. And the opposite state of mind of caring about others, being altruistic, is more beneficial both for ourselves and for others. And the practice of Tonglen is particularly geared to lessening, reducing our self-centeredness and increasing our altruism. So one way of doing the practice is using a problem currently happening in our life. So it's good to start with minor problems, not our biggest problems. So think of something, it could be just some feeling of discomfort you're experiencing right now, physical discomfort or an ache or pain, tiredness. Or it could be more mental, emotional, maybe feeling sad about something, worried about something. So don't choose your biggest problem, but think of some relatively minor problem that's currently happening right now or in general in your life. And check to see if your mind has the tendency to be kind of obsessed with this problem and maybe feeling sorry for yourself for having this problem, being very worried about it. So does that sometimes happen in your mind? So now think that you're not the only person in the world that has a problem like this. There are many others, many other people who have a similar problem, maybe the exact same problem or something similar to it. So there might be people you actually know who have this kind of problem, or you can just use your imagination and just think, lots of other people experience this problem as well. And for some of those people, the problem they have is even worse than yours. They're experiencing it to an even greater extent than what you're experiencing. So see if you can imagine people like that. And now generate compassion for those people. Because you have this problem yourself, you know what it's like, you know how painful or difficult it is. So you're in a good position to understand those other people and how difficult it is for them to have this problem. So compassion involves understanding the suffering, difficulties, problems of others, and feeling concerned about that. Your heart is moved and you wish that they could be free of their suffering, their problems. So try to generate that state of mind. And if it's difficult to do, you can just say to yourself something like, how wonderful it would be if all of those people could be free of this problem, didn't have to experience it anymore. Then the next step is to deliberately accept your own problem instead of wanting to push it away, wanting to get rid of it, wishing it wasn't there. So instead of that, accept, consciously, deliberately accept this problem with the compassionate wish that all those other people who have this kind of problem will be free from theirs. So you can say to yourself something like, I accept this problem of mine, and by my doing that, by my accepting this problem, may all the other people who have a similar problem be free from theirs. And if you wish, you can accompany this with visualization. You don't have to do this, but you might want to try it. Imagine the self-centered attitude, selfish attitude in the center of your chest at your heart chakra as a kind of lump, hard, dark lump that's an obstacle to your happiness and your spiritual growth. And then visualize the problem in the form of something like a lightning bolt. And that crashes down onto this lump of self-centeredness, annihilating it, smashing it into smithereens so that it's gone, it disappears, it's no longer there. And imagine this area in your heart chakra is now open and clear, spacious, peaceful. So within that spaciousness, it's possible to cultivate positive qualities, compassion and love, patience, wisdom, with which you can be more beneficial to others, as well as more happy yourself. And then when you feel ready to, you can come out of the meditation, open your eyes. So like I say, that's like a first step in the practice of Tonglen, and maybe more comfortable for some people who don't feel ready to take on others' suffering. But yeah, we need to learn how to manage our own suffering in a more healthy way, in a more positive way, rather than feeling upset, unhappy, angry, blaming others, or trying to run away, trying to escape from suffering and problems. So it's a very helpful way of cultivating a healthier attitude about our problems and suffering. And then later you may feel ready to do the more traditional practice of Tonglen. And even then you can start with just one person, not all living beings, and best to start with someone you love, someone you care about. So if one of your family members or friends is going through a difficulty, pain, sickness, mental or emotional difficulties, and you really want to help them, but you don't know how, or you're not able to, this is something you can do. You can visualize that person, or if you're with someone who's suffering, this is something you can do with dying people. You can do the practice in their presence, or you can just do it in your mind, visualizing them. And then think of their suffering, problems, whatever they're going through. Feel how wonderful it would be if they could be free of those problems. Feel the wish to take them away from the person so they don't have to have them. And then imagine them coming into yourself like this lightning bolt, crashing down on and destroying this self-centered attitude at your heart. And then send all your good energy your love, your compassion, your good karma, whatever good things you have, send that to the other person and imagine it turns into whatever they need that will help them be comfortable, be happy. You can go further than that. It becomes what they need to develop their minds along the path and eventually reach enlightenment. So it's an incredible practice. You can go really far with it and do many different things. So you can do it in a simple way or in a more complex way. So yeah, it's a nice practice to do both for ourselves and also for others who are suffering. And that's the last thing on my list of things to talk about, how to help others who are dying. This is kind of a big subject, but I'll share as much as I can. So Lama is that when it comes to helping another person who is dying, what that means is trying to help them be in a positive state of mind, help them to not be angry or frightened or clinging, attached, help them overcome those states of mind and help them feel peaceful and positive, as much as possible, to be in a positive state of mind. And he says this is one of the greatest acts of kindness and generosity that we can do. Because, the point of death is a really crucial time in someone's life. And if we can help someone die in a good state of mind, then that's doing them a great act of kindness and generosity. But at the same time, we have to accept that we can't change somebody else's mind. Even the Buddha can't do that. There's a story of one of Buddha's disciples who was also his cousin, and he was so negative towards the Buddha. He was jealous. He couldn't see any good qualities in the Buddha. He even tried to kill the Buddha a few times. So even though he was very close to the Buddha in the community, the Buddha wasn't able to change his mind. Buddha couldn't go into his mind and kind of fix it. So he was positive instead of negative. So it's not possible to change someone else's mind, even if we're Buddha. So we need to accept that. So we can't fix someone else's mind, but we can at least try. We can try to help them be positive. Okay, so some things we can do to help others die. The first point I have is prepare for your own death. Because if we haven't faced the fact that we're going to die and learn how to prepare for death ourselves, then our ability to help someone else die will be very, very limited. People tend to have a lot of emotions about death: fear, sadness, anxiety, and so on. And so if we haven't dealt with those on our own, if we haven't looked at those emotions and learned how to deal with those emotions, and then we're with somebody else who's dying, there's a good chance that those emotions will come up in us. And our mind will be turbulent, disturbed by those emotions, and that will make it difficult for us to help the other person. I mean, how can we help somebody else overcome fear of death if we are still afraid of it ourselves? So the more work we can do to become accepting of death and overcome disturbing emotions around death and learn how to die well, how to die peacefully, the more we can work on that ourselves, then the better we'll be able to help another person. So that's something that will take time. And in the meantime, of course, if there is someone who's dying, you just do the best you can to help them. But if you totally neglect working on yourself, working on your own mind and your own attitudes, then that's going to be an obstacle. Does that make sense what I'm saying? So all the things I've been talking about this weekend about how to prepare for death. So try to work on those, and then that will help you be more helpful to others who are dying. And then the second point is learn to manage your disturbing emotions. So we probably do have emotions in our mind about death. And if we can, this is a big part of Buddhism, is how to work on the mind, how to work with our disturbing emotions. And there's lots of methods for doing that. So learning those methods, practicing those methods, working on those methods to manage our own emotions, then having that knowledge, having that experience can be helpful for another person. Like if the person's angry or the person's frightened or whatever, we have some experience we can share with them. Try this. And this, again, is no guarantee that it will be successful. They may not want to do what we suggest, or they may try it and it doesn't work, whatever. But at least we can try. We can try to offer that. But yeah, we do need to accept limitations. Once a woman told me that a friend of hers was dying, or had already died, and he was very angry because the doctors had found cancer in him, and it was at an advanced stage where it was no longer possible to heal. And he was angry at the doctors because he felt they should have found it earlier, and then they would have been able to treat it and he would have survived. So he was very, very angry at the doctors. And she was concerned about him dying with anger. She, tried to help him not be angry, but she wasn't successful. So he was angry right up to the end of his life, and she felt really bad. She felt kind of guilty. So I said, "You tried. You can't change someone else's mind. You can just offer suggestions, but they have to be able to listen and accept and do it. You can't do it for them." So I tried to reassure her that it wasn't her fault that he died angry. But we do tend to feel responsible for other people's minds. So it is important to accept that all we can do is try to help a person be in a positive state of mind, but we can't make that happen. So the more we can learn about disturbing emotions, how to handle, how to manage, how to overcome them, transform them, then at least we have experience with that we can share with the other person and hopefully help them to be more positive. So that's a whole other subject, how to work with disturbing emotion. I teach courses on that sometimes, even 1-week retreats, 10-day retreats, because it's very, there's just a lot of material, a lot of different disturbing emotions and a lot of different methods we can use to work on them. So that's like a big subject. And also, if we are working with someone who's dying, we need to take care of ourselves. I haven't had a lot of experience with this, but people sometimes get burned out. They really want to help the other person. They put in a lot of time and energy, and it's easy to overdo that and then get burned out. So you do need to be aware of yourself and your needs, and take care of yourself and try to get support, so that sometimes you can have a break and somebody else will be with the person who's dying, but also support for yourself to help you deal with your difficulties in dealing with this dying person. So be compassionate to yourself as well. And then the third point, giving hope and finding forgiveness. So this is from the Tibetan Book of Living and Dying. And there it says that when people are dying, they sometimes feel guilt, about things that they've done or things that they didn't do and should have done. And they may feel regret, depression, or just a sense of hopelessness. And that's not a good state of mind to have to die with, right? It's not a positive state of mind. So one way you can help someone is to talk to them in a way that will help them get out of that state of mind. I mean, you need to listen and understand what's going on with them, allow them to express their thoughts and their feelings, understand, and then say things, offer suggestions that would help them think in a more positive way. For example, sometimes, I mean, I think we all have this tendency to focus more on the negative than the positive. So, you know, you think about all the mistakes you've made, all the negative things you've done, and then it's easy to forget the positive. And so you can remind the person of the good things that they've done and help them feel positive about the way they lived their life. And also if they're in a state of mind where they feel dread, like if they believe in God, for example, and they think, oh, God is going to punish me. God will not forgive me for my sins. Or Buddha, you know, they may feel this way about Buddha. Buddha will punish me. Buddha would never do that. But someone who believes in God, they might think that way. So reassure them that the nature of God or the nature of Buddha is compassion, forgiveness, and not harmfulness, not wanting to punish them. So try. Again, all you can do is try. You may not be successful, but at least try to help the person not think in such a negative way. And yeah, help them feel hopeful and feel positive about the good things they did. And with regard to the negative things, the harmful things they did, reassure them that there is forgiveness from whoever they believe in or from the universe, that there is forgiveness. If you feel regret for the things that you've done and you ask for forgiveness, there is forgiveness for them. So that's something you could do to help them be in a more positive state of mind. And then next is create a peaceful environment. So this is Lama Zopa Rinpoche's suggestion. We are affected by the things around us, things we see and so on. And so he says it's really good to make this, the environment beautiful and pleasing, peaceful as much as possible. And if the person does have religious beliefs, religious faith, have images that will remind him of that. So if they're Buddhist, have pictures of the Buddha. If they have spiritual teachers, have those pictures of those there. If they're Christian or Catholic, have pictures of Jesus, God, Mary, saints, and so on. So whatever will help the person remember their religious beliefs and be reminded of their faith and their devotion. And if possible, try to not have objects that will cause them to have anger or attachment or fear or grief. So that's something else we can do to help. And also in the Buddhist tradition, it's said that it's better not to show signs of grief around someone who's dying. You know, like weeping and expressing, oh, I'm going to miss you, and so on. Don't do that around the person. It's better do that somewhere else. Do that in another place rather than in the person's presence, because that will stir up their emotions and make it harder for them to be peaceful. So that's both before death, before they die, and also afterwards. Because again, the mind or the consciousness of the person may still remain in the body for a while, and they might be aware of noises and so on going around them. So it's one time when I was in Singapore, I was with a woman who died, and her family, she was kind of young. She was only about 40 years old. So her husband, her mother, her kids, and lots of people were around. And when she stopped, all signs of life stopped. The family members started wailing, and one sister was there with us, with me, and she was a Buddhist, and she understood the need to pray and not wail. And so I asked the other family members, please, could you go outside, go and do this somewhere else? And fortunately, they accepted. I think they understood that. So they went off and did their wailing somewhere else. And no, I mean, really, it was tragic. And then the sister and I just remained with the body for another couple of hours and did Om Mani Padme Hum and just tried to keep the atmosphere calm and peaceful. So that's the ideal thing if you're able to do it. But in the West, it may be difficult. People might not be happy to be asked to leave the room. And then number 5 is help the person remember and practice spiritual teachings and practices according to their faith. So again, if the person does have faith in a particular religion, you can remind them of that. Don't try to impose your ideas, your beliefs, your practices on them, but respect their beliefs and practices, and even do them with the person. Pray with the person, or pray for them if they're not capable of praying themselves. So that's something that would be helpful. Yeah, so you just have to use, each situation is different, each person is different, so you just have to feel out what would be the best way of talking to the person, being with the person. And again, the bottom line is trying to help them be in a positive state of mind. And if they aren't religious at all, if they have no religious beliefs, you could use terminology, for example, from psychology, whatever you can come up with, words that they would understand and relate to, and just try to encourage them to let go, be peaceful, be positive, don't be afraid, and so on. Number 6, you can continue to meditate, pray, recite mantras, and so on during and after the person's death. So before the person is dying, while they're dying, and even after they've died, it's good to continue reciting prayers and mantras and doing meditation and so on for them. So that's just a brief rundown of those points. We have just a little bit of time left. Any questions?
Is this like a PDF format, or is there a way we could go back and review it later?
Yeah, you can have a copy of this. And also there's this little booklet there's a PDF of that booklet. I mean, most of this information is from this little booklet, and that is downloadable on the website. Yeah. And I think there was one more slide with some other books references. Is that still there? There's lots and lots of books on this topic of death and dying. And these are just a few I know of. Mindfully Facing Disease and Death is this one. Analayo, so it's the Buddha's own words. And I'm leaving this for the library, so it'll be here. And then this book by Lama Zopa Rinpoche, help your loved ones enjoy death and go happily to their next rebirth. That was Venerable Robina's work. She edited and came up with that wonderful title. And it's actually, there is a version published by Wisdom, but there's also one you can download for free. You just go to fpmt.org and type in that title. And yeah, you can download that. That's mainly prayers and practices that you can do to help someone who's dying, but also yourself, things you can do to prepare for death. And then Wholesome Fear, my Lama Zopa Rinpoche, that's published by Wisdom. So that's more explanatory. There's probably some practices in there, but it's more just talking about the right state of mind and the importance of contemplating death and so on. So we've come to the end of our time, and we'll dedicate the merit, positive energy, and also we did get the translation of the prayer written by the Dalai Lama for Lama Zopa Rinpoche's return, so we can recite that. And there's also a really beautiful the colophon, like the explanation of the prayer written by the Dalai Lama is quite beautiful. So I just read that. It's sort of a homage to Rinpoche. So it says, this is the Dalai Lama talking. I composed this swift return prayer at the request of the centers of the FPMT and so on and so on, who said that since the elucidator of the teachings, the incomparable Zopa Rinpoche, had suddenly departed to peace, a swift return prayer was needed. I also composed it because of my special connection with Rinpoche, exemplified, for instance, by the fact that when Rinpoche was still with us, he would undertake any project for me, whether big or small, just as I asked. It is devastating that Zopa Rinpoche has gone in this way. However, the most important thing is that when he was still with us, he made the precious mind of enlightenment the foundation of his practice. If his followers who have been left behind train properly in the Guru's way of life, then it is exactly that which will definitely fulfill Rinpoche's wishes. Therefore, keep this in mind. Furthermore, from now on, make requests to the three jewels as well as earnest dedication prayer. So we'll do the regular dedication prayers first, and then read the swift return prayer composed by the Dalai Lama. So think of all the positive energy, merit we've created. Okay, so let's read this together. Fearless teacher and assembly of children of the victorious ones, Shravakas, Parcheka Buddhas, victorious Losang, father and sons, together with your lineage, all the objects of refuge of the infinite lands, please now bestow the virtue and goodness to accomplish this prayer. In holding and spreading the Muni's precious and complete teachings, through explanation and practice, you wore the armor of patience that is never discouraged. Incomparable, venerable Guru, to you I make request. With all wisdom, we wish all benefits continue to you, while striving the welfare of the victorious one's teachings and mother living beings. You suddenly departed to peace. At this, I lost hope. Nevertheless, through the undeceiving truth of the blessings of the ocean of the three jewels and the great waves of the mind generation of the children of the victorious ones, may the smile of a new reincarnation swiftly beam in glory 4 fortunate disciples. It's beautiful. And then I just came up with this in one day. It took me a long time to write something. Yeah, so there's actually 4 different prayers, one by His Holiness, one by Khadro-la with the new translation, Chado Rinpoche, and then Lelung Rinpoche, a lay Lama who's staying at Kopan. So there's 4 of those. And there's also apparently a lot of other lamas have sent in tributes, expression, both audio and written. So those are also on the FPMT website. So it's really, I haven't read all of them, but yeah, it's wonderful to read all this outpour of praise for Lama Zopa Rinpoche and advice for us to continue practicing as he taught. Okay, so that's been nice. Nice ending for this weekend. So thank you very much, and I hope it has been helpful for all of you. And we'll continue.
When we look forward to your teachings on Tuesday.
Yeah, I'll be doing a few more, and then next weekend as well.
Next weekend is Intro to Tantra.
So yeah, that's like just explaining Tantra. So you don't have to already be Tantra practitioner. It's just if you're curious, you want to know more about Tantra. That's what it's about. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Venerable.